Hey guys, welcome back to Will Power Garage. Today I've got a 2013 Audi A4 with a 2-liter turbo in it. The timing chain let go and introduced the intake valves to the pistons. It wasn't a happy meeting. Alright guys, so since my timing is messed up and the engine is now damaged from the failed tensioner, I'm going to start removing the cylinder head. So I need to remove the cylinder head so I can inspect the damage that's there. I know this looks quite daunting. You have all the cam solenoids on the one side. There's a turbo hanging here. You know, there's all kinds of lines on the back of the motor, plus your coolant hoses and such. So I'm going to do this kind of piece by piece. You know, a lot of this will probably be fast forwarded, but I'm going to at least give you guys a quick rundown of what I'm going to do. You know, obviously you got to start with the basics here. So I'm going to remove all the electrical connections on top of the cylinder head, remove the coils. I'll probably leave the spark plugs in for now. I'm going to leave the turbo attached to the cylinder head, but I do have to disconnect the catalytic converter from the outlet of the turbo. There's a bracket, a support bracket that goes from the bottom of the turbo to the block. You have to loosen up the one on the turbo and then disconnect the lower portion of it on the block. Obviously I need to remove both the oil feed and the coolant banjo bolts here, as well as the turbo oil drain. What else do we have here? On the intake manifold side, you know, I'm going to leave the intake manifold attached, but there is also another support bracket on the intake manifold that you need to disconnect, because it ties the intake manifold to the block as well. I'll probably may or may not remove the alternator just to get better access. Probably will. What else do we have here? Obviously the intake hoses to the intake. You know, it's pretty much basic stuff. So I'm going to set the camera up and I'm going to start taking things apart here. Okay guys, so like I said in the intro, these intake valves here were introduced to the pistons and the valves lost. So you can see all the kiss marks on these. They're all bent. The seats look like they're okay, so I'm going to go through all the steps on how to remove, seat them all in, and essentially replace these valves for the cylinder head. So as you can see, I removed the cylinder head pretty much complete. Turbos on it, vacuum pumps on it, the coolant flanges on it, the intake manifolds on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of that and give me some, you know, give me a little more room and make handling the cylinder head a little easier. The other thing is I left, it's hard to see here, it's very heavy. If you see underneath there, the cam girdle is still installed, so the camshafts are still in it as well. So I'll go over the procedure of how to remove that cam girdle, get the cams out safely, and then into the procedure to get the valves out. Now there is a special tool from Audi. I do not have it, so it might be a little interesting to see you know, how I'm going to get these valves out of here. But since all the intake valves are bent, I think, and I can see some marks on some of the exhaust valves, so I'm just going to replace all 16 valves here. So with that being said, I'm going to cut to some time lapse and we're going to disassemble the head. Okay guys, I have the head pretty much stripped. Turbo manifolds off, vacuum pump, high pressure pumps off. You can see I have the intake manifold off. I did leave the injectors in. The reason being, if you remove the injectors, you have to install a new Teflon seal on the injector. Audi and Volkswagen sell an injector kit, they call it. It essentially comes with the clip, the O-ring, and a new Teflon seal. Those are relatively expensive. If I'm not mistaken, they're somewhere in the range of about $50 a pop. So, you know, 50 times 4, it adds up really quick. So I'm just going to be very careful leaving the fuel rail in. You know, on this 2-liter, it's held in with bolts anyway, so the fuel rail should stay in place. I'll take pretty good care when when it comes to actually cleaning the cylinder head up. So I'll take good care when I'm cleaning the chambers up here, because this right here is the injector and there are very small holes there. So I want to clean those up, but you know, I don't want to damage the orifice holes in it, because it'll change the spray pattern. You know, so it's just the way I'm going about it. If you're you know, pretty wealthy and you want to spend the money, good for you. But like I said, those seals, or at least the seal kit, is pretty expensive. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lay this cylinder head back down on the mating surface. You see I still have the head gasket on there. I kind of left it on just to protect the mating surface on the cylinder head, since I am, you know, shuffling around on the bench here. Okay, so I have the cylinder head laid down again. Like I said, this top plate is actually the cam girdle. I know many of you probably want to call it a valve cover. It is covering the, you know, upper valve assembly, but it is also the cam bearing surfaces, as you can see a little bit better here, for the intake and exhaust camshaft. So these bolts here are actually holding the cams down and have pressure on them because of the valve springs and whichever valves are open. On this head in particular as well, there are the solenoids to change the cam profile. This is similar to, you know, a lot of people are familiar with Honda VTEC. Sort of does the same thing, kind of shifts over to a more aggressive lobe with different duration, different timing. So these solenoids are what controls that. There is a tool that Audi says to use. You take these out, you put it in certain holes, you rotate the engine. What they're trying to accomplish is just to get all those profiles in their you know, static state. Since this chain was skipped, I have no idea where these are, so I'm not even going to remove these. I don't have the seals for them. But when I go to put the cams back in, I'm going to make sure they're all in the right position, so everything will actuate as it should. So I want to show you guys real quick from the ELSA program here. This is what they say to use for the removal sequence. They're pretty much just telling you work from the outside in. So start from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 till you get to the center, and then you can remove that cover. So that's pretty much what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to remove this cover, get my cams out, and get it positioned so I can start removing the valves from the cylinder head. Okay guys, as you saw, I've got the cam girdle off. You can see all the changeover solenoids. I did have to remove the front one so I can get to the T30 that was in this front corner. But here you can see where those changeover solenoids ride in, and then the two separate profiles for the camshaft. What it does is it literally shifts this whole assembly over and gives a different profile on the rocker arm. So the other thing I want to point out here is this engine has some mileage on it. It is not brand new, obviously. So my next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean my bench off here a little bit. As you can see, it's messy. What I want to do is I want to be able to lay out everything where I take it out. So I want all these rocker arms to go back into the same position that I take them out. Even though they're roller, they may very well be just fine going in anywhere. I want to put them back in the same place. It's just a habit of mine. I think it's good practice. You know, everything's sort of worn into each other. So I'm going to remove all those. Even the little, I'm going to call them lifters, but they're not really in each one of these bores. I'm going to keep everything matched just the same. So if it came out of cylinder 1, it's going to go back into cylinder 1. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to clear a space on my bench here, get everything nice and clean, lay out a couple paper towels, and get this thing ready so I could start removing all the valves and everything. Alright guys, so there it is. Camshafts are out, all the rocker arms and the lifters are out. I now have full access to all my valve springs, valves, keepers. So the next part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start removing all these valve springs so I can get all the valves out. Since I am replacing the valves in all of the cylinders, it doesn't really matter what spring goes back to which valve. The intake and the exhaust springs, retainers, keepers, they're all the same. So I could just take these all off. I'm going to put them into a container, clean everybody up, and when it comes time to putting the new valves in for the last time, I'll just grab them as I go. One weird thing I'm going to show you guys, one of the rocker arms here, the pin actually backed out. So at least on this one guy, I'm going to have to replace the rocker arm. And I thought that was kind of interesting. The roller still kind of spins, though not very well, and it, you know, has a little bit of a funny wear on the one side. I don't know if this happened with the timing chain failure or what, but it is kind of unusual. Alright, so next step, I'm going to pull off all these valve springs. Okay, so I'm going to start taking out all the valve springs and keeper retainers so we can get these valves out. This is the tool I'm using. Now, I had to make this one because the clearance in here is very, very narrow. This is the tool I had. You can see the size difference is, well, probably about a 1/4 inch bigger in diameter. This also has a little steel ring and a magnet in it. This is what catches the retaining keepers when you smack this with a hammer. And as you can see, I've got 3 of them out already because I wanted to make sure it worked before I tried to film it. So it's pretty simple. I'm not worried about damaging the valves any further because they're already all damaged, but usually I'll put the head up on a piece of on some wooden blocks so I have clearance for the valve to come down when you hit it with a hammer. and that's it. Now I can pull the spring out and make sure I grab the keeper. So I'm going to do that for both the exhaust and the intake valves, and then we'll pull all these valves out and start cleaning the head up. Okay guys, as you can see, I've got a clean cylinder head now. I went ahead and I just put the new valves just into the guides. If you've seen my other videos and ones where I've rebuilt cylinder heads, you've seen me use this before. This is just valve lapping compound. Like I said, the valve seats are not damaged, but since I'm putting new valves in old seats, you have to lap the valve to the seat so they seal nice. You don't want any gases leaking by. You can actually burn the seat up like that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put some lapping compound on the, obviously on the sealing area of the valve here. You don't need a whole lot, just enough so you can actually cut the valve in. Just make sure you don't get any on the valve stem itself, because you don't want to cut the valve guide. Sometimes even a little bit of oil on the stems is good, because you're going to be rotating these around, moving them around a bit. What else? Where's my tool? Okay, this is the valve lapping tool that I'm going to use. You can get these just about anywhere. It's just got various size suction cups. I usually will stick this in in an electric drill so I can cut the seats a little bit quicker. It is a little tricky sometimes, just because, you know, anytime you get a little contaminant underneath the suction cup in the valve, it doesn't want to stick, so you're constantly wiping it up. But, you know, I've got quite a few valves to do here, so using the drill definitely makes it go by a little faster. So, like I said, different size suction cups, 2 different handles. Basically what you want to do is, once you have the compound on here, you're going to stick this, and you can use this to twist the valve back and forth and get it to seat in right. Okay, real quick, I'm going to show you. Here's the lapping compound. You can see it kind of gets a little separated, so you want to mix it up. You know, there's like oil in there, and then the actual grinding compound itself. It's not something you use very often. And like I said, you don't need a whole lot. So, take the valve out. Just need a little bit on the seat of the valve here. And drop it back into its guide. So obviously this is the exhaust valves, but I'm going to do both the exhaust and the intake because I'm replacing them all. If you were just replacing a single valve, you still want to lap in the valve to its new seat. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my lapping compound on all these valves, and then I'll show you guys real quick just the technique to use the lapping tool by hand. It'll probably be a little harder to catch it with the drill, but it's basically the same idea, just the drill is spinning it obviously much faster. So let me go ahead and put all the lapping compound on all these, and then I'll show you the technique. Okay guys, so I've got all the compound and all the valves. I'm going to show you my handy dandy tool here by hand at first. Like I said, it's pretty simple. You just got to make sure the suction cup's clean, the valve's clean. You're going to stick this guy on there and back and forth motion with your hand. You can hear it cutting. When it starts to sound a little quieter, pick the valve up a bit and go back down. Up and down. Usually the intake valves need less seat time than the exhaust valves. The seats on the exhaust valve get a little bit pitted. So you might have to cut them a little further. But I'm going to do this a few times. You can see my annoyance here already. There's a little bit of the compound on the valve and it doesn't want to stick. But after a while, pull the valve out, wipe the valve up. That's what you're looking for on the valve and the seat. Okay, so what you're looking for on the valve and the seat, I'll try to get the camera to focus here. Come on. There it is. You see that nice little gray ring there? You can see the little shine from the top and bottom of it. You want to make sure it's all uniform all the way around. And then the same for the seat itself. So you want to make sure the seat itself is nicely uniform. It's going to be a dull grayish kind of color all the way around. You can see a couple of the lighter marks there, but you know that's sort of okay. This is a good seat. I'm going to cut it a little bit further, but that's it. So it's basically about how much I'm going to have to do all the intake valves. Like I said, the exhaust valves are a little bit more pitted, so I'll probably have to cut those a little bit more. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lap in all these valves here, and then I'll tell you guys my next step once I'm all done. Alright guys, so I've got all the valves lapped in. Went ahead, used my drill so I can do this relatively quicker, a little less wear on my hands and everything. So I just want to mention a few things. Obviously you want to check often, make sure that the seat is cutting nice and even like I said earlier. Once they're all the way you want them, you're going to pull out each valve and keep it, use some method to mark where this valve is going to go again. I'm going to wash the valve, so a lot of times just using Sharpie is not enough. I'm going to sort of lay it out like I have all the other cam parts and the old bent valves, as you can see. Look at those guys. Looking good. So, yeah, I'm going to lay out all these valves. I'm probably going to wipe them off, get all the lapping compound off, maybe use a little brake clean. But I'm going to put these back in the exact hole that I took them out, because keep in mind you just lapped that valve to that seat, this valve to this seat. You don't want to go mixed matching them afterwards, right? So everything is now lapped together. Once I get all the valves out, laid out the way I want them, I'm going to take the cylinder head into the parts washer again, and I'm going to wash out all that lapping compound. You want to make sure the guides are nice and clean. You don't want any of that lapping compound anywhere. So it's a good time to do your final cleaning on your gasket surfaces. This is obviously the head gasket surface, so you want this to be nice and clean, flat, especially for an MLS gasket. What's the other thing? I'm going to pull off the valve seals now before I clean it, because I am going to replace those as well. You see those down there. I'm going to go ahead and pull those out. You don't need any kind of special tool. Just be mindful. You can take them off when the valves are out, obviously, but just pull them out. Pair of pliers, something, pull them out. Wash the whole cylinder head again. Make sure you get through all the oil galleys. Blow it out with compressed air. You want everything clean and dry. The top gasket surface here, you can see I still have a little residual here on the top. Make sure all of this is clean, because again, this is a machine surface. The girdle is part of the cam bearing, so you don't want any kind of dirt or debris in between here, for not only for oil leaks, but also so you can maintain your bearing clearances here. So I'm going to pull the valves out. I'm going to wash the cylinder head, and when I come back, I'll show you guys briefly how you put the new valve seals in, and then we'll get this cylinder head back together. Alright guys, as you can see, I've got the head all nice and clean. All my surfaces are clean. I blew out all the threaded holes, all the oil passages, everything, to make sure all the water and all the dirt is out of this thing now. I pulled out my old valve seals while I was cleaning it. My parts washer is heated, which is wonderful because it makes drying the cylinder head that much better and faster. But at this point, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the valve seals in, and then I'm going to put my valves in, and followed by all my springs and keepers. So I just wanted to show you guys real quick, for those of you that don't know, this is a valve seal. If I remember correctly, it's what's known as a positive seal, valve seal. Some of the older guys might remember like umbrella type seals. They really just went over the valve, and it just kept the oil from being pulled into the guide, and then, you know, it would burn the oil and you would see blue smoke coming out of the cars. This is literally scraping the oil off of the valve before it you know, gets past. Lets just enough oil in there to lubricate the valve, but not so much that it's going to be pulling oil past the valve and into the combustion chamber. So what I do to install these is I use a socket where the socket fits over and just to the metal portion here. I'm using a 3/8 of an inch socket. This just happens to be 1/4 inch drive, and they're really just kind of pressed in over the valve guide itself. You know, you want these things to go on straight, you want them to go on all the way. Let's see if I can get this on camera. I kind of just line it up, try to stay in the same angle, give it a couple of light taps. You'll hear the different sound when it's all the way down, and that's pretty much it. So you're going to put these on all the valve guides. This gets the same valve seal for exhaust and intake. Again, be careful, you don't want to really bang on these things. You might break or damage your valve guide. You're just tapping it enough just to get it down. Make sure it's seated all the way. Hear the difference there? Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in all these valve seals, and then I'm going to flip it over, and I'll show you what I do at least to get the valve into place before I put the springs in. Okay, so all my valve seals are in. One other thing I probably should have pointed out to you is I'm using new valve seals, but you want to make sure that the area where the keepers are is nice and smooth. You don't want to have any burrs on these, because you will tear the valve seal and then they will leak. So even though I have new valves, I'm going to make sure that all of these are nice and smooth, so that when I push these past those valve seals, they go past nice and smooth. I don't have to worry about tears or anything. A lot of times with a valve that's been in the engine for a while, just the action of this thing moving up and down so much, it sometimes rounds off the metal just enough that you'll catch a burr, and it'll you know, destroy your valve seal. So just keep that in mind before you install these valves. So I have the cylinder head set up the same way that I took the valves out before I washed them. The only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure, obviously, that they're clean still, and I'm going to put a little bit of motor oil on the valve stem itself. You don't need a lot. You're just trying to lubricate this thing until you know, oil starts to get up to the top of the motor. And a lot of times, even when I'm going to start a motor for the first time, I'll try to you know, deactivate the fuel pump or the injectors or something, just so I can crank it to get oil up to the top of the motor, to everything for that matter, before I actually fire it up. So a little bit of oil on the valve. I'm going to put a little bit of oil in the guide itself. You know, no matter what, I have the engine apart, it's going to smoke a little bit when I first start this thing up, just from coolant, from, you know, oils that spilled, from just, you know, just taking it apart. So I'm not really worried about excess oil in the chamber itself. You know, obviously when we go to put the head on the engine, we're going to make sure that the gasket surface is clean again. But a little bit of oil, and again, like I said, you want to make sure it goes past that valve seal nice and smooth. And just keep going with each valve. Like I said, just a little bit of oil. Making sure there's no burrs at the end. Same thing for intake and exhaust. At least on this cylinder head, you're going to treat them exactly the same. A little bit of oil. Like I said, that's the same seal. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the rest of these valves in, because I'm sure you don't want to watch me oil every single valve. And when I come back, I'll have the head up, and I'll show you guys how I'm going to put the valve springs and retainers back on to hold everything together. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to get this on film. What I'm using here is a spring compressor. This is made by OTC. That's the part number right there. Basically, the way it works is there's an adjustable pad here where you can adjust depending on the thickness of your cylinder head, and it's pretty much just a big C-clamp. What you're doing is you're holding the valve up on the back, and the top portion you're compressing the spring. As you can see here, let me get my screwdriver and I'll point to it. I've got the two keepers in place on the valve itself. The spring is there, the top retainer where the keepers go into. This is the valve itself. So when I release this, those keepers are going to be retained up in there. So let me pause the video real quick because I can't release it while holding it. And then I'll try to set the camera up so you guys can see, basically how I get the keepers in there. Okay, so with it released now, you can see there's the top retainer and there's the keepers in there with the portion of the valve just sticking out where the rocker arm goes. So let me try to set up the camera here, and I'll at least show you guys how to do one of these. They're the same on this cylinder head for intake and exhaust. The springs are the same, the keepers are the same, everything's the same diameter. So let me try to set up the camera and I'll try to show you guys how I do it. Bear with me because the head is in an awkward position for me to do this, just so I could try to get this captured on camera. But obviously the first thing I need to do is, I kept all the keepers just sitting on top of the valve spring. I removed them because if I put them on like this, they're just going to fall out. But you need to put the spring into place, and I can tell you the valve is all the way up. You can see how it's sitting back there a little bit. Now I'm going to take my spring compressor. Again, I'm going to try carefully to get this on video. It's not easy. Alright, so I have the back portion on the valve. I'm going to compress this valve spring compressor now. I use a small pair of needle nose pliers to grab it. Let's see if I could show you here. And as you can see, these keepers are tapered. So you want to install it with the bigger portion up. The smaller end goes down towards the valve itself. So what I do is I use a pair of needle nose pliers and a screwdriver to get this into place. And you want it to fall into the groove of the valve, and you'll know when it's in place there. This one I'm going to push up to the top, and I'm going to grab the second keeper because there are two. Again, the same taper. I'm going to put this in here. Same thing, needle nose holding it. Screwdriver in place, and once they're in place, I can release my spring compressor, and there you have it. Again, you can see the valve sticking up just a little bit. Keepers are all the way flush into the top plate, and that valve's being held up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do all the rest of these, get all the springs and keepers into place. Alright, so I have my fully assembled and cleaned cylinder head here. My next steps, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little assembly lube on all my lifters and rocker arms, and I'm going to drop them into their corresponding holes and valve. I'm going to leave the camshafts out for now, as well as the top girdle, because you know I'm obviously ready to install this cylinder head onto the car, and you can't really get to the exhaust side bolts with the exhaust camshaft in place. I mean, you could pre-drop the bolts in, put everything together, and then carefully drop it on the block. I was going to do that, but you know, there's plenty of room to deal with the camshafts afterwards, so I'm just going to leave that off. I did want to point out though, if you are just rebuilding a cylinder head and you want to know how to reseal the top girdle here, this is how ELSA says to apply the sealant, and they call for no more than a 2mm bead of sealant around all these perimeter spots where the arrows are pointing. You also want to put in a new rear plug cap, and you can see the specifications of how deep it should be there. It gives a depth of 1 to 2 millimeters. It says not to apply any sealant to that. You know, you drive it in after the cover's on. I usually put it in place before the cover's on. I don't know. It's just the way I've always done it. But I just wanted to show you guys that. Now keep in mind that this sealant here is not RTV. It is a special Volkswagen sealant. I'll link in the description the part number of that sealant itself. I don't know if it shows it here. No, it doesn't show it there. It just says 2mm size tip, but I'll link in the description the actual sealant you need to use for that. Okay guys, I hope this video has helped clarify some of the steps you need to do to rebuild your 2-liter cylinder head. If you have any other questions or feel like I left anything out, just drop me a question in the comments. I'm usually pretty quick to answer those. You know, I'm kind of doing this job. There's many steps to the job I'm doing. This is just one part of it. I figured just making a short video of rebuilding the cylinder head would be a little better than having to go through the video to find, you know, this section if you're just looking for that. So Make sure your gas surfaces are nice and clean, especially the mating surface where it goes to the block. This is an MLS gasket. You don't want any mixed burrs. You want it nice and clean. Make sure you clean this thing with some kind of degreaser before you put it in. Brake clean, something to clean that surface. This and the block before it goes back on. When you have the valves out, if you're just replacing a couple of bent valves, make sure you take all the valves out because it's a good opportunity to clean these chambers. And if you know anything about these engines, you know that these things get pretty loaded up with carbon on the back of the valves. My valves are sort of pretzels, but you can see the carbon buildup just on there. So here's a good time, an opportunity to clean the ports out really well, the air dividers really well, make sure everything's nice and clean. Let's see, on the top end here, clean the cylinder and everything so all the port passages are dry. You put an assembly lube on all the cam bearing areas as well as in the lifters. You don't have to pump them up with oil. Assembly lube is fine. Make sure all your holes are clean and everything. And don't forget 2mm bead on all the sealing surfaces up here with the Volkswagen Audi Sealant. Don't use RTV. The sealant is as the name says. It's used for sealing out these machine surfaces. It sticks a lot better than an RTV will. Lasts. I've almost never seen these gaskets fail. It is a little pricey, but in the long run, if you don't want any oil leaks or anything like that, I definitely think you should go that way to buy it. You don't have to go to the dealership. A lot of the aftermarket, European websites sell it. ECS, FCP, Euro, those companies sell it as well. It's made by Loctite. You could probably even buy it by Loctite. And like I said, I'll leave the part number in the description, as well as all the torque specs for everything for this. So I'm going to continue putting this Audi back together, but that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave me a comment below if you have any questions. See you next time.